Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft live stream. Rob Staton, Adam Nathan, Robbie Williams with you here to discuss a few topics. We're closing in on free agency. It's not too far away. The NFL Combine is next week as well, and things are going to start rolling into action now in a number of different ways. So lots to get into. First of all, fellas, we are approaching free agency, and one of the big discussion topics at the moment among Seahawks fans is how aggressive are the Seahawks going to be and how aggressive do they need to be this year? So given how they've approached things in the past, which is not to be very aggressive and kind of wait till the second wave of free agency and see what they can do, give me a thought, starting with you, Robbie. How aggressive do you think the Seahawks will be and how aggressive do you want them to be?
Well, I mean, how aggressive I think they're going to be, my gut tells me just by past experience, they're going to come out and they're going to do kind of the same thing. They're going to wait on it, see how the market plays out, and then they'll kind of sign the guys that they're kind of looking for. My guess is we'll probably see some signings of our own guys just right before free agency, and then maybe we'll be surprised. I would love to see them come out and be aggressive and get a first day signing. Typically you're not going to see that from them. So my gut feeling is that's what's going to happen, but who knows? Maybe this is going to be a different year.
Adam?
Well, we've spent a couple of months listening to things like run it back, and that's generally led to coaching decisions in the main with talk about Pete Carroll and John Schneider, and everyone's gone through the magnifying glass of Seahawk Twitter of do they deserve to be back. And I think run it back is going to have to link to how aggressive they can be with the players too, because if they want to use that term again and bring back Dwayne Brown, Reed, Diggs, Penny, that 34 million, even if you extend that with the extensions, you're going to be dipping into that pool of money quite substantially. And I think it will probably leave you in a position where aggression, Seahawks probably won't be at that front of the queue of buyers, I wouldn't have thought, if they do spend so much money on their own guys. So I think we'll know how aggressive they can be in free agency, depending on, as Robbie said, what they do with their own guys. But I think that's probably the first thing that we're going to need to look at to really establish where we think they can go from their first few days of free agency.
So having a look at the cap space per over the cap at the moment, the Seahawks have got about $32 million to spend, which is, compared to the rest of the league, quite a lot, but they're not quite a lot given that they've got quite a lot to do in terms of the players who are free agents. And, I'm sure we'll discuss, one of the big topics is Bobby Wagner and his future and whether or not you cut him to save nearly $17 million to create a little bit more room. Just on the topic of how aggressive the Seahawks will be, though, fellas, I get the sense just from reading the tea leaves, just from little things like you hear Jake Heaps say that Sean Desai was convinced to come to the team on the basis that the Seahawks are going to be somewhat proactive in terms of improving their team, from Pete Carroll saying essentially they just weren't good enough, that the teams in the NFC West have better players. And he said that the cap money will also shrink up very quickly once they start re-signing their own players. But he also said that before the meeting with Jody Allen. And it seems that despite the fact that a lot of people want that to call that meeting with Jody Allen a bit of a non-event, a run-of-the-mill meeting, I think that the fact that there's been a coaching firing, or two coaches fired since, and changes made, it suggests that perhaps that wasn't the case. And that maybe Jody Allen has said, no, come on, we want to see a bit more action here. And I think for a coach who is 70 years old, and again, we're going to get on to Russell Wilson, a lot of the talk is, well, why would Pete Carroll move on from Russell Wilson right now? He needs to win now. He's 70 years old. I also want to use that argument to think the Seahawks might be a bit more aggressive this year. Pete Carroll cannot afford another 7-10 season for a number of reasons. The main one being, I think he'll be fired in 12 months' time if he has another 7-10 season. The Seahawks have got to be better. I don't think they're going to go out and recreate an all-star team in free agency, but I do think there is at least a chance we could see a couple of signings made that make you go, oh, that's interesting. And another thing to remember, the Seahawks typically haven't been busy on the first day of free agency, but they have made signings on the first day of free agency in the past. Luke Jokel was signed by the Seahawks for $7 or $8 million within the first hour of signings being announced back in the day. So they have done moves early. They just have been piss poor. That's the problem. So have I convinced you at all, Robbie, that they're going to go out there and get that big pass rusher or cornerback or offensive lineman?
No, when you throw names out like that, like Luke Jokel, man, maybe. No, I don't know. I'm still pretty convinced they're kind of gonna sit and wait. But I mean, I think you're right on one aspect is if they're gonna be more aggressive, getting into the free agent market sooner and going after the guys that you really want instead of waiting for those second tier players to come around. It's smart to go after them now and do it immediately. I wasn't really impressed with what they did the last couple of years, to be honest. So for me, I'd really love to see them go out there and really target players, someone on the defensive line, even, whether it's a D tackle or D end. I mean, we need something there. We've talked about this over and over. I absolutely hated what they did at the center position last year. I think that's something they can be aggressive in, either in the draft or in free agency. That something needs to happen there. But I think, kind of like what Adam was saying, I think a lot of the money is going to depend on what they do prior to free agency with signing their own guys. Maybe they're going to free up some cap space. Maybe they'll get another $4 million by releasing Jason Myers and maybe restructuring. You talk about Bobby Wagner. That's a hot button, I know, for a lot of people. And I think kind of ultimately what I think is going to happen there is they'll probably end up extending him and kind of freeing up a little bit of money. But we'll see. I mean, there wasn't a lot of drop off when he was out of the league or when he was not playing. So for me, it's a tough pill to swallow, but I kind of just feel like this just seems the direction that it's going to go, but man, who knows?
Corey has sent in a super chat. Corey, thank you very much, sir. Keep those coming. Super chats. If you've got a question that you desperately want answering, super chat is the way to go. We will jump to it straight away. Adam, what I really want to avoid is an off season like last year, which was one that I think was doubly irritating because the Seahawks it's not that they didn't do anything. They did do some things, trading for Gabe Jackson, for example, signing Kerry Hyder, those kind of moves, Akella Witherspoon. They were just, what's the right way to describe this? They were just noteworthy enough for people to convince themselves that the Seahawks were making some really great moves. That Gabe Jackson was a great trade, that this was the Seahawks getting the job done. And it felt to me, as this was all unfolding, that wasn't happening. And so it showed. Gabe Jackson, a player who was practically on the verge of being cut by the Raiders, was going to be cut until the Seahawks stepped in. Akella Witherspoon, who they traded before the season even began. Kerry Hyder had like half a sack all season. I don't want another off-season like that. It's time to go and get some quality. Go and land a quality player, at least one quality player in free agency.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, the Seahawks have never been inactive. If you go and look at Spot Track since 2013, 2014, I mean, there are reams of moves they've made in free agency. And I might argue, or slightly nervously suggest that is what Pete and John think being aggressive is. If you look, I think, was it 3 or 4 years ago, they had $57 million or so to spend. And they probably came out of it thinking, fantastic. Ben Sameoa, Bruce Irvin, those are going to be our edge guys. And we've gone out and got the guys that we want. I mean, I think half the problem is, do they even want the right guys? Aggression is one thing. Evaluation of the talent is quite another. And ultimately, if you look at what they've done in free agency, it's not really been good enough for years. And they've had to patch that up with trading assets. Going back years, from Sheldon Richardson, being the first sort of bandage over quite a large canyon of a gap they had. And eventually it has started to catch up with them. So this is probably the first year they really cannot afford to waste a cent of what they've got. If they've got designs of being a championship team, which I suppose this run it back system suggests that they think everything's gravy and they were just a middle finger away from launching another deep playoff run. I don't happen to agree with that, but that seems to be the mantra coming out of the VMAC.
I mean, I think that when you look back to sort of a couple of years ago, which is the last time they said the pass rush was the priority, I think that what they did is they looked at the landscape of who was a free agent, who was available, and they came to a decision. This is just a complete guess that the likes of the Robert Quinns who were available and other players like that were not going to be worth the money that they ultimately got, and that they felt that Jadeveon Clowney was worth, a certain amount, whether that was 18 million or whatever they were offering him. But because he wanted even more, and because that situation went south, they ultimately didn't have a sufficient plan B. And plan B in this instance happened to be Benson Mayowa and Bruce Irvin, and then trading up for Darrell Taylor, who missed his entire rookie season. So that's what I would like to see is a plan A and a really good plan B. And for me, plan A from this would be Chandler Jones. I know that some people say, well, he's 31, he's going to be 32. This is a player who has barely missed much time at all in 5 or 6 years of his career. Is still, if you bring him in, there is a reasonable chance that he's going to get you at least 10 to 12 sacks this year. And I want that kind of production. I want the ability to get somebody in who you feel that confident about, who would be a terrific bookend for a Darrell Taylor and a Carlos Dunlap. And if he's plan A, then I want you to have a proper plan B. Is it a Von Miller? Is it a Harold Landry? Is it, Daniil Hunter, if he ends up being cut by Minnesota, and I wrote about this on Friday, he could easily be plan A ahead of Chandler Jones, because he's got something like a $26 million cap hit. He's due $18 million on a roster bonus on March the 20th. I think it's highly unlikely, given that the Vikings are well over the cap. They are millions of dollars over the cap, that they pay him $18 million roster bonus on March 20th and have a $26 million cap hit. So they're either going to cut him or they're going to restructure his contract and extend him. And I think it's hard to do that when you're already on the hook for a $26 million cap hit and $18 million with a player. Because where do you go from there as a team? How do you negotiate from that position? It's a crap position to start negotiating with Daniil Hunter, but they can't justify the $18 million. So I think there's a decent chance he gets cut. If he gets cut, he's 28 years old. He's fantastic. But do you see what I mean? It's like you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Somebody pitched Clowney returning to Seattle yesterday. I'd have it, because he may well be inconsistent. He may well play 3-4 great games and not 15, which is what you ideally want for a lot of money. But the thing about Clowney when he was here last time was he had no help. It was him on his own on the D-line. And if you put him on a D-line with Darrell Taylor and Carlos Dunlap, I think he could be even better than he was in 2019. Yeah, he's a couple of years older, but I'd still be open for that. And the price would probably be a lot lower than it was a couple of years ago as well. So there are options there. Have a plan, have a process. Don't just go for all your eggs in one basket and then pivot to the journeyman, Robbie. And I do think that they are going to try and do something here. I think they acknowledge that the time is now. And for a team that traded 2 first-round picks plus for Jamal Adams, was willing to go that aggressive for Jamal Adams, it's time to be that aggressive in free agency this year.
Yeah, I agree with you, and on a lot of aspects. I just worry that they have those guys in their mind, and they set a number, right? They set a number of the guy, like, this is as high as we're going to go for this player, and they'll pitch their offer and they'll say, well, we were in on it, and it just didn't work out, and then they'll go with plan B, and I would love to know what their plan A is usually. Like, I'd love to be able to see that, see what going forward, like, what was your plan A? What was you actually trying to do? It's just hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine that them coming in super aggressive, knowing that a lot of this money is going to go away fairly quickly, just re-signing some of our own guys. But I hope you're right. There are a lot of players out there. And there's going to be some cap casualties that I think we will not really be expecting, that will be like, hey, this might be a good fit for us as well. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how they go forward with it.
Yeah, there's definitely some casualty options. Zadarius Smith is one of those in Green Bay. Green Bay are in a real bind at the moment because they are tens of $1 million over the cap. I think it's like $30-40 million over the cap, and they're scrambling around. They've restructured Aaron Jones's contract and Kenny Clark's contract because they are trying to create a situation where they can retain both Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. They will probably be able to do that if they want to, because they can manipulate Rodgers' contract. It will mean some pain down the line. But if they want to keep Rodgers now, and that's the decision Green Bay need to make, do they want to have another 1, 2, 3 year crack at this, or do they just want to bite the bullet, make the changes now, and not face oblivion maybe in 3-4 years' time, because they're in a real serious situation with the cap? And apparently Aaron Rodgers wants $45 million a year, but Zadarius Smith would save them a fair chunk of cash. If he was cut, I think Frank Clark is almost certainly going to be cut by Kansas City Chiefs. It's impossible to imagine that he is going to stay there on the kind of money that he's on. And Eddie Goldman, who is a defensive tackle, had a horrible 2021 season, but is familiar with Sean Desai. That might be a good or bad thing in Goldman's case, given the season he had last year. But again, if he is cut, or can you get him for a cheap trade to add time? But either way, Adam, it's just about, they've got to add something, haven't they? They've got to, I would love nothing more than sort of a week or two into free agency, having a conversation with you guys saying, doesn't it just feel great? The Seahawks have been really proactive. They've made some really positive moves, and you feel energized again and excited about the upcoming season.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I mean, the question I would come back to, I mean, you've covered it all pretty well, same as Robbie. I don't think I can add too much more to it, but looking at it from a future standpoint, it strikes me, and you might tell me that I'm wrong here, that it's going to be quite difficult for the Seahawks to build both for the future and for the immediacy in this upcoming free agency. And I guess, without wanting to take it back to the interminable discussion about Pete Carroll and his quality or whatever, would you be comfortable with the Seahawks mortgaging 2-3 years of the future again on this regime in backing them to go and win you a title? I mean, I know obviously they've basically done that by not making any real tangible changes, to the most important positions of the coaching staff. So I'm interested to know that, we all want to win now. It's nothing worse than going into a season without thinking you've got a chance to get something done. But would you be comfortable with them saying, right, we're all in for this year and to hell with 2023 onwards?
I wouldn't go to that extreme. I don't know about Robbie. I don't want a situation where the Seahawks put everything into this year, for example, or even for the next 2 years. But I think that they can certainly be more aggressive than they have been. I think that you can find the best of both worlds. You can find a middle ground somewhere where you are sufficiently saying, okay, we're not going to mortgage the future, but we are going to be somewhat creative with the cap, like a lot of teams are. We are going to find a situation where we can really elevate this team for 2022, and we're going to give ourselves a far better chance of being a successful franchise in the postseason. And you just sort of look at some of the contracts that are out there. If they really wanted to, they could set up a contract like with Chandler Jones, the same way that Arizona did with JJ Watt, which means you're on the hook for 2 years and then you're gone. Or you can structure a deal such as the Frank Clark one, 2 or 3 years in, you've got nothing beyond that. If you wanted to do something like that with Howard Landry, you can do. The Leonard Floyd contract is very, it's all sort of, you put yourself in a window where it's 2-3 years, but then there are outs, so that if you need to rebuild and repair in a couple of years' time, you can do that. That's what I would like to see the Seahawks do, be a bit more aggressive in terms of how they use their cap, bring in more talent, but also give themselves the leeway so that if they need to reset in another 2 years, then so be it. I think the bigger problem for your question, Adam, that I kind of feel is I don't want to be sat here in 2 years with this thing having been completely squandered, because it's kind of, that's the experience we've had over the last few years. I think there's been a number of squandered seasons. I don't want to waste 2 more. Russell Wilson's trade value be completely through the floor. You end up just sort of parting ways with him a couple of years down the line, when potentially you could trade him now to a desperate team like the Washington Commanders and get an absolute haul that won't be there necessarily in 2 years' time. That's what worries me. That's about the balance of what is right for the Seahawks. Should they just rebuild now? Should they have just got rid of Carroll and rebuilt from this starting point? Or should they be going, we're going to go and try and win for another 2-3 years with Pete Carroll? And I really hope that in 2 or 3 years' time, we're not wishing we could go back in time and be a bit more open to rebuilding now than perhaps in the future. Robbie?
Yeah, I mean, on top of that, I mean, kind of like what you're saying, being aggressive. You just saw the Rams win the title, right? And they were aggressive. They traded everything for all the best players. They tried to buy a title. So I could see maybe Pete and John being like, it's a copycat league. Like, when we won the Super Bowl, everyone was like, okay, we need big, fast, badass defensive corners, and they went out and tried to do it. And I look, the Broncos replicated it right after that. I mean, everyone tries to go out and repeat what the champion did. So I could see them, being kind of the benchmark for going out and trying to be aggressive on players and grabbing guys who are can play in this league and not just kind of those tier B kind of guys.
Got another super chat here. Corey's got in touch again. Cam Jordan from the Saints, he's thrown out as an option. I mentioned Cam Jordan a few weeks ago, but I've since had a look at the financial situation with that. If the Saints trade him or cut him this year, they basically save $1.7 million. So it's barely going to make a scratch on their financial situation for this year, and they lose Cam Jordan. So I think it's almost certain that he will not be. Obviously, if somebody offers them like a first-round pick or something for an aging player, then maybe. But I don't think Cam Jordan is a very likely option. I don't know if you guys saw this. Richard Sherman, I don't know if you know, but he's quite vocal at the moment. And he was talking yesterday, I think it was on his podcast for PFF. And he basically said, and I don't know whether this is a report, that he's actually spoken to people that have given him a steer here, or whether this is an opinion. But he said with some great confidence, actually, that he felt that Stephon Gilmore would be signing with the Niners or the Seahawks this offseason. Now, the one thing about Gilmore is, as we all know, is a tremendous man cover corner. And we've heard Clint Hurt talking about man coverage is going to be used more, whether this is as a replacement for DJ Reed or as a complement to DJ Reed. I'm quite interested in this. His PFF grade was in the high 70s. Even though he was being spelled a little bit more, he was going to be managed through the year. He's going to be 30. I think he either is 32 or he's going to be 32 soon. I know he's an aging player, but I like this idea. I think it would be a good addition. Adam, would you be in favor of a move like that?
I think I would. I think over the last few years, if there's anything that I feel, I think we've discussed it, that's let the team down is a lack of blue chip or potentially blue chip talent. And I think with someone like Stephon Gilmore, he's not of an age where those days are absolutely behind him without a shadow of a doubt. So I think if for a reasonable price, you can get a player who is potentially blue chip, that's what this team needs. We've got far too much, middle to good. And for me, not enough good to great. So if there's a way that you can swindle a deal for someone in that upper echelon, I think that's exactly the kind of player that, look, if you're going to go down swinging, go down trying to get Stephon Gilmore and see if you can recreate his Patriots form. Don't go and, Akella Witherspoon. Don't do that. Life's too short for Akella Witherspoon in our lives. You know what I mean? Like, if we're going to do it, let's do it properly and have a swing at this, because that's what we're here for now. And by all accounts, it does feel like we're in that season of, we're in that 1 or 2 year window of it's crap or bust at this stage.
Robbie?
I mean, he was linked to us last year, right? I mean, if I remember correctly, I thought he was linked to us last year as well. So I'm all for it. I think it'd be a great addition. I think, it definitely helps our corners. And I can't remember last time I remembered a corner actually getting an interception. So I'd love to have a guy who's out there who can actually, who's an actual ball hawk. So I'd love to see it.
Now, all of these moves, I mean, like, for me, nothing would excite me more than, and look, I'm willing to, if it doesn't work out, if they go out and sign, let's say, Chandler Jones and Stephon Gilmore, and I will happily post a degree of excitement on the blog, and we'll say I'm in full favor of the moves. And if it doesn't work out, I'm not going to then suddenly chastise the Seahawks for a bad year or for those moves not working out. I just want to see them try. I think over the last couple of years, they've not given themselves a chance to be great because of the journeyman that they've signed and the way that they've approached personnel moves. If they take a chance and it doesn't work, as long as you believe in the chance, you can't really complain about your team. Like when Sherman was calling the Seahawks fans entitled or whatever he was saying that they were, or that they got no, what was the term that he used? Sherman. Accountability. They had no accountability, Seahawks fans. That's what he said. And then he suggested that they just want the Super Bowl every year. I don't. If the Seahawks get dumped out in the divisional round again or the NFC Championship, as long as you kind of think, well, look, they've given themselves every chance of succeeding and we've seen improvement this year, that's fine with me. I just want to see them heading in the right direction again, and I don't think they have been for a few years. So, basically what I'm saying is that I just want to see them do something and be proactive. I think to come back again to the point on the cap, though, it's going to take some very difficult decisions elsewhere because you can't sign everybody. So it comes down to what do you do? Where do you make your saving? Personally, I'm very happy to bring back Dwayne Brown. I don't think he's a liability. And I think having a left tackle who isn't a liability is quite a useful thing to have. I'm not saying that he's a great left tackle, but I think you could do a lot worse. Let's put it that way. So on a 1-year contract or a 2-year contract, I'd happily see him back. I listened to another podcast this week that said that the Seahawks should probably just give Quandre Diggs $18 million a year, and I nearly fell off my chair because Quandre Diggs to me is exactly the kind of player you do not reset the market for. He's really good. I'm not against franchising him and using that franchise tag as a starting point for negotiations and saying we're going to, we've got your rights for this year. You're going to get 11 million or whatever it is, but we need to negotiate. We want to negotiate a long-term deal, bring your cap hit down this year and give you some security off the back of an injury. And by the way, you've had a very serious injury here and we're committing to you with a franchise tag, guaranteeing you X amount of money already for 1 year. You may not be fully healthy at the start of the year, but we're committing to you. Now you commit to us and we're going to lower that cap hit and sign you to a 3-year contract. I think that is the right approach for that. But if you don't want to franchise him and if other teams are offering more money, then move on. Just get another safety. You traded for him for a 5th round pick. Go and get another veteran safety who can fill that free safety role. He is not Earl Thomas. Paying him $18 million a year is ludicrous. And for members of the Seattle media to be suggesting that is staggering, frankly. So I would move on from Quandre Diggs if it gets to that point. If you paying Jamal Adams $17.5 million means that you've got to pay him 18, move on. And then you look elsewhere at the other positions. And well, there is relatively one other position. There's two, isn't there? DJ Reed, I guess, you have to set a limit on what you're willing to pay him. And you have to let the league sort of tell you whether he's going to get more than that. And if not, you can bring him back. And I would like to see him back. I think he's a really good player. But then it comes back to linebacker. And we've already touched on it briefly. For me, there is absolutely no justification for paying an aging, non-impactful Bobby Wagner $20 million this year or extend. I don't even want to lower his cap hit, guys. If you speak to a lot of Seahawks fans, they'll say they want to keep him, but they want to lower his money. It's a sentimental nonsense. Jordan Brooks, right, I had a look at TFLs, tackles for a loss, in the league last year. And Jordan Brooks was actually quite high on the list, He had 10. Do you know how many tackles for a loss Bobby Wagner had last season? 3. 3 tackles for a loss. He is not making enough big plays. He is hesitant. He's not playing anywhere near the level that he was even in 2018. It's simply time to move on and take that $16.6 million and spend it elsewhere. And it's a shame because I think I know what the answer is, but do you expect the Seahawks to actually do that, Robbie?
No, I mean, I don't. I think they're not gonna release him. I think I already touched on it a little bit. I think ultimately what they'll probably do is they're gonna extend him to drop the cap hit this year, and they'll probably sign him for the next 3 years or something, and we'll all be like, that's just too much money. I think that's ultimately what I think is going to happen. You kind of touched a little bit on, like Dwayne Brown. Well, I like Dwayne Brown. There's nothing against him, but if it was my money and I'm trying to we're trying to finagle this a little bit, Dwayne's probably going to get about 11 million for 1 year or something like that. I mean, give or take, roughly around there. I mean, I try to maybe go get someone a little younger. Eric Fisher's out there. I was screaming his name when he got released by the Chiefs. he was the guy that I think he's a great left tackle. Last year, his PFF grade was only like a 68, and Dwayne Brown's was a 71. Dwayne Brown gave up 8 sacks. Eric Fisher gave up 7. He started 15 games for the Colts last year, and I think he's a hell of a left tackle. I think you could get him for probably about $8 million a year. Get him on board for a 3-year deal or something like that, and then all of a sudden you're saving $3 million right there, and then you can use that money going elsewhere. But circling back to Bobby Wagner, I mean, I'm on the same board. I don't want to be too sentimental. I think we should probably, release him now, give him an opportunity to go somewhere else. I mean, he's going to be a Seahawk Hall of Famer, but I mean, it's time to move on.
There are 2 issues with him. It is the sentimental stuff. People have just become so familiar with him and they're so attached to Bobby Wagner that they can't bear the thought. The thought of not having him is crazy to a lot of fans and media. But there's also there's the media aspect to it. You are constantly fed by the national and Seattle media. Bobby Wagner is an amazing player over and over again. And the truth on tape is that he is not playing to the level that he did a few years ago. He simply is not. I mean, you only have to listen to the Seahawks press conferences. Every other week there is a question to Pete Carroll, how good is Bobby Wagner, said in a variety of different ways. But this is the message. People have been brainwashed a little bit into thinking that we're talking about the second coming here. And look, Adam, I was speaking to Rob Guerrero this week and saying that it's a little bit different over here in England because, the soccer teams over here, invariably, there are players who spend a lot of time at clubs. You follow a team where there's, players that have been there quite a long time, very popular players. But for the most part, I mean, the teams that I cover in the region that I am, players don't stick around much at all. They're here for maybe a year or 2, maybe 3 years. You don't have those long-term players. And when players generally move on, there isn't that much sentimentality about it. The uproar is usually when a really good player is sold, perhaps not for the value that fans expect. But in the NFL, because players tend to stick around a lot more, the idea of just ripping the Band-Aid off and moving on from a player who is no longer great is really hard. And what I don't want to do is keep Bobby until he's not just not great anymore, but he's actually pretty crap. And then do that. The time to move on's now, not 2 or 3 years down the line. And you can get cheap linebacker play. You can get a linebacker who's going to run around and hit people. I've done a horizontal draft board, which is loaded full of linebackers available in day 2 and day 3. There's just no justification for keeping hold of Bobby Wagner. Curtis has put this in the comments. Not just 3 tackles for a loss, but 1 forced fumble, 1 interception, and 1 sack last year. These are terrible numbers. Yet despite all of this, Adam, I fully expect to see Bobby Wagner lining up for the Seahawks next year.
I haven't really entertained Wagner leaving because, as I say, I think, or as you've said, the expectation is just, well, he'll be extended for 3 years with a couple of void years maybe, and that's how they'll do it. But if I can play devil's advocate slightly, just to kind of bring the conversation back to the other side, the Seahawks probably played the most turgid form of defense in the history of anything last year. And I've never been so bored watching Seattle on defense. And in the past, it's been just as exciting watching both sides of the ball play because something's always likely to happen. But I think I'm right in saying that Jordan Brooks was only 2nd in the NFL in tackles to Bobby Wagner in the whole of the NFL. I think I'm right in saying that. If I'm not,
I think Brooks ended up with more because
Wagner missed that last game.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if maybe with an aging linebacker, the system in place, just, we see it all the time in football, as you say. Sometimes there's a tactic that just does not suit the way a player plays. And I just wonder if perhaps with a more aggressive defense, with a defense that spends 30% less time on the field than it did last year, you're not going to be exasperating this guy and draining his energy on just tackle after tackle. And again, this might be nonsense, but I just wonder if of all the players they've let go and given the extra year to, is there any justification that maybe this new aggressive defense that we're about to see might be something that suits him?
It's a good question, and people have been asking the same kind of question. What happens with if you go to sort of a 3-4 hybrid or use more 3-4 concepts? Will it help Bobby Wagner? My answer to that would genuinely be no, because it was flagged up to me during the season. Watch these specific plays for Bobby Wagner and tell me what you see. And that was by somebody who knows a lot more about NFL linebacker play than I'll ever know. And I watched them and I gave my honest response, and they said correct. And it showed a player who you have a route to the ball carrier, and you would expect a linebacker in that situation, based on what his duty is in that play call, to attack that gap, fill it, and hit the ball carrier. And that's what you see. And you watch, it's not just, older players do this. You watch Levante David, he still plays this way. You hit that gap and you hit the player. And Bobby Wagner's hesitant. He's stood. He's unsure. He kind of fills the gap or he gets blocked out of it. He doesn't hit the player. There's a screen pass. I mean, like, Jesus. Seattle's defense of screen passes last year was, I was going to say abysmal. That doesn't do it justice. And you watch plays where Bobby Wagner's riding the guy downfield. He's not making a tackle. He's like running parallel with them and not making the play. So is a more aggressive style going to help Bobby Wagner? I would say, yeah, if he still played with any bloody aggression. I don't think he plays with any aggression. And I think you watch I'm watching the draft prospects, Channing Tindall, Leo Chenal, Brian Asamoah. These guys they see the ball carrier, they go. They are going and they are hitting, and there is no hesitation whatsoever. They are playing with violence and speed. And for me, Bobby Wagner doesn't play with violence and speed anymore. Therefore, I don't think it matters if the system calls to be more aggressive. I think, if anything, Robbie, a more aggressive scheme requires more aggressive players.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate part is that, even not last year, but the year before, we were kind of saying, like, maybe we should keep KJ Wright and drop Bobby instead, because KJ just seemed to have a better year. KJ, he was one of those guys who he sniffed out those screen passes and seemed to be in the right position. And Bobby just doesn't have that aggression. Adam, to Adam's point, I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I haven't actually thought about it that way, Adam, and I love that you brought that up, because you never really know how a player is going to fit in a new scheme and a new system. But I wonder how much of it, there's a lot of talk going on right now, right? Clint's saying all the right things, making us all fired up. How much of it is it really going to change? I don't know. I'm hoping it's going to be different, but I struggle with actually believing. This is one of those scenarios where I need to see it to believe it, kind of thing. All the talk right now is all the talk. It's hard for me to get behind anything until I actually see it.
And can I just highlight this as well? Curtis has put another comment here that I want to highlight. He says the play versus the Rams. Do you guys remember this, where Darrell Taylor blew up the receiver? Taylor absolutely hammered that guy. And he started about 3-4 yards behind Bobby Wagner, zoomed by him and hammered the ball carrier. Bobby Wagner just stood there. And the alarm bell just started sounding as I was watching that play live. It was like half of my reaction was, wow, Darrell Taylor is an aggressive player. That's the kind of player this defense needs. And half of my reaction was, what the hell is Bobby Wagner doing there? How has he allowed Taylor to come from behind and hit that guy as hard as he has? And he should have done that. He was closer to him. And he was just hesitant again. And I don't want to pay him $12 million. I don't want to pay him 10. I respect Bobby Wagner. I appreciate everything that he's done for the Seahawks. He ain't good enough anymore. And it's time to take that money and be cheaper at linebacker and be more expensive in the trenches and at cornerback and at positions like that and on the offensive line to help the team move forward. I'm conscious that we're already 40 minutes in and we haven't said a word about Russell Wilson, which is maybe because the situation doesn't call for it anymore. I'll give you my opinion on where I think it is, and you guys give me yours. I think that Russell Wilson is still very open to a trade. I just don't think he sees any path out whatsoever, because Carroll needs him, has not got an alternative option, has no interest in trading him. So even if Wilson did what he did last year and went on Dan Patrick, or sent 4 teams to Adam Schefter, or maybe even requested an official trade, I don't think Pete Carroll would budge. Therefore, what's the point of doing all of those things? I think he feels that it'd be a futile effort. And if he asks for a trade request and it's turned down, then he becomes the villain, which Russell Wilson's a very image-conscious person. He wants to, if he does leave Seattle, end up being Seattle's answer to Matt Stafford. The fans in Detroit were rooting for Stafford in the Super Bowl. He would want to leave Seattle and have the Seahawks fans rooting for him in a Super Bowl if he was to get there with his new team. And if he requests a trade and goes head-to-head with Carroll, that will not happen. He'll be booed. He'll never be welcomed back in Seattle by the most part. He'll never come back and have any kind of ceremony or Ring of Honor or anything like that. He'll be in the same boat as an Earl Thomas, probably. Fairly or unfairly, very different situations, but he will tarnish his reputation with the Seahawks, and I don't think he wants that. So I think we're kind of stuck. I described it as almost like a loveless marriage recently. It's a marriage of convenience. They're staying together for the kids. And I think that's how it feels right now for me. But I don't think he's going to be dealt at all because of the situations I've just discussed. But I tell you what, I'd love to know what the Seahawks are going to get offered, because in the next week, Aaron Rodgers is going to tell everybody what he's doing. And if he's staying in Green Bay, there is going to be a mad scramble in Indianapolis at the Combine of teams wanting to meet with John Schneider to make an offer. And I want to know what those offers are, because I want to know what the Seahawks are turning down for Russell Wilson. Because if it's just 3 first-round picks or 2 first-round picks and change, I can live with it. If it's a haul that has never been seen before in NFL history, which I kind of suspect given the draft class and the desperation of teams like Washington, who are rebranding, who are getting Mike Silver to write articles on their darn website to try and promote their desire to trade for one of 4 specific quarterbacks that he wrote about in code, as they try and cover Daniel Snyder, isn't it? All of the issues going on behind the scenes there and the toxic culture in Washington, they are going to go all in on a trade. I want to know what they're prepared to offer that the Seahawks are going to turn down, because I want Wilson to stay and I want Seattle to build around the quarterback that they have. But I'm also very nosy and want to know what other teams are willing to offer for a guy who I think, if it was down to him and he could get out in a respectable, managed way, then he still would. What do you reckon, Adam?
I think that if ever anything showed a real leadership vacuum in Seattle, it's that this conversation is still going on a year down the line. And I'm at the point of thinking that if in 2 weeks I see that Russell Wilson signed a new 6-year contract, I'll go, huh. And if I see at the Combine he's been traded, I'll go, huh. Because it's so tiresome and it's become divisive, and you've got, certain journalists that believe X and certain journalists that believe Y, and there's snarky quote retweets, and it's just really boring. And you talk about Wilson, what he wants for his legacy and how he wants to be viewed in Seattle. I think for him to really come back and get the enormous fanfare from Seahawk fans, and again, maybe I'm got a bad read on this, but for me, he needs to win another championship in Seattle to kind of make up for the nonsense last year with Dan Patrick. There was talk about the Seattle Mount Rushmore and who's on yours now. Wilson probably isn't on there for me. It's not to say he's not maybe the best player they've ever had, but for me, someone like that is about your attitude and what you've done as a person. And I've said on my show loads of times that Wilson has spent so much time trying to create a brand and an image that he actually doesn't have one at all. And we've got this guy that we don't know much about, but we hear him talk an awful lot. And in a way, the more he talks, the more boring it becomes. And I just want some sort of resolution to this. And I think it's almost corporate negligence that this has been allowed to drag along for 12 months without anything really concrete being done about it.
I think some very interesting points there. The whole brand aspect of Russell Wilson, and we've talked about it loads of times, Adam, that it's a perfume, it's a food product, it's a bottle of water, it's a clothing range, it's social media, it's a sandwich, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks. nothing has stuck, has it? Nothing has stuck for him. He has not achieved the sort of the global domination that he hoped for. It might be part of the reason that's driving him towards wanting to go to a different market, be around different people, experience different things. Maybe feels like some of his ideas are good. It's just because he plays in Seattle as opposed to New York or Las Vegas or something like that, that has prevented him from achieving that sort of world domination that he craves, because he clearly wants to be a LeBron, a Derek Jeter. He wants to be the kind of guy. Like, listen, if Russell Wilson flew over to England, people would know who Russell Wilson is, but it's a tiny percentage of the number of people who would know if LeBron James came over to England or other parts of the world. Russell Wilson is not a worldwide, he's not a Cristiano Ronaldo, is he? He's not a Lionel Messi. He's not a LeBron James. He's not a Usain Bolt. And I think that's what he kind of wants to be. And he ain't. He's not a Lewis Hamilton. He's well down the pecking order in that regard. And I think that does irk him somewhat. I just wish, Robbie, sorry, I'll bring you in a sec. I just really wish that people would be adults and just make a decision on this. If Wilson wants to leave, just say you want to leave and go. And from the Seahawks perspective, don't have Carroll say on Fox, whatever it's called now, it used to be called Q13, Fox Seattle, whatever. Well, we're going to listen to all the offers, and you never know. We might trade. It's going to make some big decisions coming up. Hey, listen, just commit one way or the other. You can't run a franchise where your quarterback annually is flirting with leaving, and you're kind of like, should we trade him or not? Well, if there's a better offer, we will. But if not, we'll kind of stick with it. You can't win that way. Everybody's got to be driving in the same direction all the time. And rather than it dragging on and on and on, and this never-ending conversation happen, sit down now and get it sorted. New contract. Said this a year ago, didn't we, Robbie? New contract now. End this once and for all. Lower his cap hit this year to free up $20 million so that you've got even more money to spend. You might even have to cut Bobby Wagner if you want to keep hold of him that badly. If you sign him to an extension and eliminate this once and for all. Or alternatively, trade him and accept that and get a different quarterback. And if you have to get more stock for next year to trade up for Will Levis or this Alabama quarterback, so be it. And if you have to ride with Tyrod Taylor or whoever this year, so be it. But make a call either way, because this can't go on and on and on. If for no other reason that it's splitting the fan base in half, because you've got it's becoming almost as divisive as it's become like Seattle Seahawks Brexit or anti-vax versus vax movement. Oh, Wilson's happy. It's a media creation versus what are you talking about? He clearly wants to be traded and all this. It never ends. And it's splitting the whole infrastructure of the franchise in two. It needs to be solved in the next month for me. What do you think, Robbie?
Well, I think you guys nailed a lot of what I would say, right? I mean, the reason why we haven't seen a request trade from Russ yet is because two things. One, it's his image. You're right. He wants to keep that image and his brand and make sure he's not, he doesn't want to ever be the villain, right? So he wants to be that good guy, do the right thing, make sure that he tries to go out on the best foot possible. And then, the other thing is I think he just, he probably saw the backlash from last year and probably didn't enjoy that. And that's probably the other thing. I think ultimately Russell ends up staying. I think what ends up happening is I'm not saying he's going to a contract extension this year, but I think we probably won't trade him. Here's my only maybe on this is that last year, John Snyder, from everything we gathered, I don't know if this is true or not. Last year we gathered John Snyder was going to accept that trade from Chicago. Chicago made an offer. John liked it, presented it to Pete, and Pete said no. Now, is it true that John has a little more power this year? I don't know that either. This year, there's going to be probably a bigger and better offer. Now, listen, I live in Indianapolis right now, okay? And in Indianapolis, they're desperate. Carson Wentz is out. They can't stand the guy. They're willing to give up anything to get a new quarterback. I've been listening to the radio shows. They're willing to just throw their whole draft and kitchen sink at getting a Deshaun Watson or a Russell Wilson or an Aaron Rodgers. I don't know what the Washington Commanders are going to give up. They could give up, I've heard of, the Chase Young and all these things, but they may be desperate to give up even more. We don't know what the packages could be. There could be an opportunity there that just be like, Damn. Okay, that's hard to pass up. Hard to pass up. And you never know. I mean, the Las Vegas Raiders, everything sounds like, oh, we're good with Derek Carr, but is that trade talk? Is that like talk to like lessen a trade offer that they're going to give someone? Well, we're happy with Derek Carr, so we will give you this and this because we think it's a little bit better, but we're happy. Maybe not. Maybe they'll actually go a little bit further. There's a lot of desperate teams out there. New York Giants, that's another team that could be throwing things. I think there's a lot that could happen, and I wouldn't kind of like Adam said. I wouldn't be surprised if I woke up tomorrow and like, hey, Russell Wilson signed a 6-year deal. Okay. Yeah. Oh, Russell Wilson's been traded to the Giants for, 3 first-round picks and every player they have in the next 4 years drafts. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm not surprised. That wouldn't shock me. I'm over whatever it is. Figure it out. Let's move on. But again, this is the thing. We're not going to know until draft. We just not. I mean, we might know a little bit prior to the draft, at kind of start of free agency. And if Russ finally gets to that point where he's like, yeah, you just didn't do enough in free agency, I want out.
That's a great point. I think that is a very real prospect. If the Seahawks start free agency and they botch it, they don't make the improvements they need, maybe even lose some players, then I think that's a situation where Russell Wilson will potentially consider requesting a trade. Because if the Seahawks actually get worse in terms of their roster from a year ago, he ain't going to just sort of sit on that sinking ship and go through a year of this. So that could change things dramatically. If free agency doesn't go the way that we've talked about, or I've talked about hoping it will go, then that changes everything. And part of the problem is, if you don't resolve this before free agency, instead of having your top recruiting tool being, we have a franchise quarterback, unlike that team, and that team, we're all in for this year. We're going for the Super Bowl. Come and play for us. You meet with players and they go, what's happening with Russ? And it's like, well, you've got to justify that to every free agent, or you've got to add a few extra zeros on the end of a contract to get them to sign. Whereas like the Chargers can go, well, we don't have any of that. If it's between us and Seattle, we've got Justin Herbert and he's completely bought in, and we're not going to have any drama like that over the next 10 years. Come play for us. Help us win a Super Bowl. And there's 10 or other teams that will be able to do that too. That's you're losing what should be a positive for you in the free agent market with Russell Wilson. So that's why it should be sorted before then. New contract or trade. I wanted to ask you about, and there's one other point to make. Jake Heaps said this yesterday on 710 ESPN. He said that when the Rodgers thing is sorted, that's when the Wilson media stuff will ramp up. And that's when Russell's going to ultimately have a choice to make, because Wilson will be well aware of the offers that are coming in, the alternatives he has. That's when he will have to make a call. And that's when things could get a bit spicy. Just before free agency, if Rodgers makes a decision next week, as people have been suggesting he might, that's when it could go nuclear. And we'll see what happens there. And we'll see how much Wilson thinks about the idea of Washington, Philadelphia, Denver. To be honest, I think Philadelphia will balk at the price when it eventually comes out, that what Washington's paying and teams like that. And I think Denver and Washington are the two teams that are going to be at the forefront of all of this. I think the Raiders and the Eagles and the Steelers will not want to pay what it's going to take. But I think Denver and Washington will. So I think it's those two teams that are going to be most aggressive for Rodgers and Wilson, and those two teams that will be most aggressive for whatever's left if they don't get either of them. I did want to ask you about a deal that you would accept, though. What is a trade-off fee? Put yourself in John Schneider and Pete Carroll's shoes. What offer falls on your desk that makes you think, actually, I might consider that? And for me, I'll go back to what I said with Jeff last week. It's a high quantity of picks, 2 or 3 over the next 3 years, and Chase Young. And I would even be willing to do first this year, second this year, first next year, second next year, and Chase Young. 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and Chase Young. Why? That gives you number 11 this year and number 42 to go with your 41. And you have first and second, your 2 firsts, 2 seconds next year. If you're telling me that you can't find a quarterback between now and next year with all of that draft stock, that can at least get you to the postseason in the way that the Seahawks have been doing. I struggle with that because I think there are quarterbacks that are going to be available next year. I think there are veterans that are going to be available. And I think if you put Chase Young across from Darrell Taylor and with Carlos Dunlap, and you save money by trading your quarterback and save $40 million in 2023, I think you can improve your roster greatly. So that is the kind of offer for me that I would consider, Adam, as much as I want to keep Wilson. I raise an eyebrow at that. What do you think? What would you go for?
I think there need to be 3 very high picks as a minimum. And I need multiple of them, that's a stupid phrase, a number of them to be this year, because ultimately, if you end up trading him to a team that's ready to win and you end up with the 28th, 29th pick in 2023 and you're using it as a rebuilding tool, that's probably not much use for you. It's interesting because I think last year I was saying that maybe we should trade Wilson now because the deal we're going to get next year probably isn't going to be as good. That hasn't appeared to be the case. And I think he probably has retained his trade value, which, didn't have a very good season. We're at the point of about 21, 22 consecutive games of, not elite quality play, I would say. So thankfully, he's managed to retain that value. I guess scarcity has done an awful lot to do that. I think your thing of I think 3 first round. I mean, there's a team that has 3 first round picks this year, right? Is it Philadelphia?
Eagles.
Or the Eagles? That's probably, if I'm in charge, why not? I want 3 first round picks this year.
You see, I'm not as a big fan of the Eagles one, just because I think it forces you to have, I think I'd like the idea of having picks next year so that you can plan, prepare. It might be that a trade emerges over the next 12 months that you want to execute either for a quarterback or somebody else. You might want to trade up into a better quarterback draft, or even if you move Wilson, you might end up with a top 5 pick anyway, and you can take one, and then you've got the stock to build around that young guy. I'd quite like to spread the stock out between this year and next year a little bit more. And I totally take on board everybody who says you can't trade Wilson and do this. And look, I want to keep Russell Wilson. People know my opinion who are on the blog. I'm just presenting a situation for an offer I would consider accepting. I think if you can elevate your defense to a great level, and I think sort of Chase Young, Darrell Taylor, Carlos Dunlap, maybe even another with the money you save, and if you can get Stephon Gilmore, and if you can bring back Quandre Diggs, you could have a really good defense next year. And you might be able to then use some of those picks to build up your offensive line, or you might have some money to pay up for your offensive line, and you might actually have a more rounded roster. And yet you're going to have a worse quarterback. You're going to have a point guard. You're going to have a Tyrod Taylor or somebody like that, or a Mitch Trubisky. I get it. That's not a long-term solution, but maybe you can find that long-term solution in a year's time. And maybe you should just embrace it and try something different. And maybe we all need a little bit of that. Maybe as a fan base, we just need something that's new and different to galvanize us a little bit more. I don't know. Robbie, give us is there an offer that you would consider?
That's tough. So I just want to make sure I clarify this, Robbie. You said you would take a first and a second this year and a first and a second next year and Chase Young for Russell Wilson.
Yeah, and potentially, and if I could squeeze a bit more, like a mid-round pick, another player, then I would try and work that into.
You want to know what's silly? That's not that much more than we gave up for Jamal Adams. We gave up 2 firsts, a third, and a player. I just think that's too much. That's too little. I think for me, listen, if Washington presents me the deal that you just said, I say no. You need to give me another first the following year, and maybe take one of those seconds off and give me a third. Okay, a first and a second this year, a first and a third the following year, and then your first round pick that year. You give me Chase Young, and then you're going to have to give me a quarterback in return. You're going to have to give me Taylor Heineke. That's it.
You don't ask for much, do you, Robbie?
No, I'm going for. Hey, listen, you're going for a top tier quarterback. When we gave up as much as we gave up for a free safety, you better go on. You better go for what you can get and get everything.
In fairness, though, Randy McDougald and Chase Young for about $4 million.
Very
$4 million. And you get 2 years of Chase Young at about $4 million, by the way.
Yeah. Listen, I think you stay with the 3 first round picks. That's the starting point of your conversation, and you need to give me a quarterback. that's the start. That's the starting of the conversation, but there needs to be more added to it. That's when I start to listen. That's why I added more.
I'd say, just to finish, it is quite entertaining watching all the other fan bases. Especially the Washington fan base. They are so crazy about, because obviously on YouTube with the way that it does, the algorithm. If you watch one video on a Washington fan and craving Russell Wilson, you then get thrown every video that's Washington wanting Russell Wilson. And I must have watched like 10 of them in the last 2 weeks. They are desperate for a quarterback over there. I kind of feel a little bit sorry for them. But then I also kind of wonder, I kind of feel sorry for us as well, because we've just endured the last 2 or 3 years of watching the Seahawks and want them to be great again.
I want to see that desperate. Why not go for more? If they're there, if they're rebranding and they're trying to make, then you give me 3 firsts, a second, a third, and 2 players,
and 3 holiday homes, and a holiday in Dubai.
Oh yeah,
and your dog. It's like, give me everything.
It all.
I want that hat, and I want everything, and I want your car.
Give it to me.
I want your jacket.
Give it all. Yeah.
Your boots and your motorcycle. That's
what
I think
you
give
have
me
to
everything.
Stick with 3 first-round picks. I don't have to be this year, but you have to give me 3 first-round picks. That's just the starting point.
Well,
knowing what we gave up for Jamal Adams, I have to stay with that. I mean, it's crazy.
And there is greedy robber baron Robbie Williams talking about the potential of a trade from Russell Wilson. I think we can all agree to finish that we just want to see something happen. I just want some. Well, if it's a Russell Wilson trade and then a load of picks, or an exciting free agency, or something along that, I want to see that. I just don't want to see boring free agency, no first round draft pick, nothing, and then a same season, Adam, we've been watching for the last bloody 4 years.
Well, I've been thinking for the last half an hour. You pride yourself on your terrific website, Seahawk Draft Blog. And the way we've been talking, it's almost like we've punted on the fact that the Seahawks could ever build a team from the draft again. We're talking about Quandre Diggs and DJ Reed. If you want to build a championship team, you have to find me a safety in the second round that's as good as Quandre Diggs. Like, that's how you do this. And then you save that money and you put it on the trenches. And in the third round, get me a cornerback that can start. It's amazing that, obviously it doesn't pertain necessarily to the Russell Wilson conversation, but when we're talking about how we're going to rebuild this team, we're talking about cap space and extensions and restructures. We didn't even once talk about the fact there's a draft where you're supposed to build your team. And it's fascinating to me that maybe it's subconscious or we just didn't take the conversation in that way. But I wonder if a lot of Seahawks fans are almost forgetting that we also have a draft in whenever it is March, April, that we're going to get 6 players plus that are supposed to be the future of the franchise.
Adam, you bring up a really good point there, because Rob, you wrote a piece on an offensive line a few weeks ago, and you highlighted Cameron Jurgens. That is the guy. He's not going to be a sexy pick. He's a center out of Nebraska. No one's really going to know, but this guy is someone that I think could be a game changer on our offensive line. I love the article, Rob, that you wrote there. That one was awesome. If you guys haven't seen it yet, go read that, because it's fantastic. And that guy, Rob put some clips up there on him. Animal. I'm sold on that, because he's like who I want now. Like, that's who I'm targeting.
I was going to say,
sorry to chip back in. I think Big Mike's been commenting. He said, "Well, Adam, look at the draft record, say for DK, then fire everyone and get people who can draft properly. Like, we can't just keep going along in this perpetual rubbish of, every draft is just this. In fairness, they have had a couple of players that have come through, but if you're not happy with the drafting year on year on year, get rid of the people that are doing it and get other ones in, because other teams get to do it and they seem to do it really well. So it can happen. Make it happen here."
What I was going to say is the reason we haven't talked about the draft is because Robbie has suffered enough over the last 6 months listening to me banging on while he's just had to sit there. And I'm afraid that if we'd have gone into the draft talk, I would have just got off on one talking about the 30 or 40 players that I really like in this class. And I think what I will say is it's a great draft class.
I'm here for it. I am here for it.
I think it's a really good draft class outside of the first round, which is perhaps worked quite nicely for the Seahawks, given that they don't have a first round pick. So I think you can build a foundation in rounds 2, 3, and 4. They do have that. I'm glad they have that extra 4th round pick. I really hope they don't trade it away for a 30-year-old guard. Like, just keep hold of that pick and use it, because I think there are some great options rounds 2, 3, and 4 in this draft class. So I think you can build a foundation with that. Fellas, always great to talk Seahawks. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Well done to England in the rugby. Sorry to all the Welsh fans who may have been watching this. Subscribe to the channel. Give the video a like. Share it. I'm trying to think of all the YouTube things you have to say at the end of the video. I think I've got them all there. Watch the video.
Like it, subscribe.
Comment. Share it on other forums. Subscribe. Definitely subscribe. That's the most important one. And if you want to chime in, Patreon is there for you as well. Until next time, I just have to say, Combine next week. I have booked the week off work to cover the
Staton
Combine.
season. It's Staton season.
The Combine. I work very hard, I promise, in my day job, but the Combine takes it to a new level. It is just hours and hours and hours of slog and watching and writing, and my hands feel numb at the end. And last year, I was really grateful that the Combine was cancelled and said, I missed the Combine for the data, but I don't miss it for the slog. But the slog is back. It's back. There'll be a live blog throughout the Combine, plenty of these streams and everything. And Robbie is going to be at the Combine as well, aren't you, Robbie?
I will be at the Combine every single day.
Yep. He's going to be there. We're going to have boots on the ground at the Combine.
Right.
So there we go. So look forward to that. Stay tuned for that next week. Ultimate Combine preview, which is going to be an absolute beast, is coming out over the next few days as well. Until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye for now.